Hello everyone and welcome to today's lesson. It's a little bit off the cuff now via my mobile because I had planned to do a live lesson via, I don't even know why I'm wearing these headphones because they're not plugged into my phone. I had planned to do a live lesson on my computer, but to do that you need a certain software, and now that YouTube has updated its back end, its studio, my software is no longer compatible, and I don't know why. So hello, I'm now going live from my mobile, which means I can't share any notes or anything on screen. I'm going to see if I can bring up the live video on my computer at the same time so that I can at least write in the chat and read your comments. It looks like I can. Fantastic. Brilliant. So, hello everyone. As you can tell from the title of this video, I'm doing a little lesson on the coronavirus. Of course, this is affecting so many of us around the world. Now, the coronavirus originated in China, but now has infected so many different countries, which I'm going to cover a little bit later in this video. I'm going to give you some vocabulary that you're likely to hear if you were to watch a news report or read a news report in English. So some of the vocabulary you're most likely to hear, but maybe you're not so familiar with because these kinds of things don't happen very often, thank goodness. I do hope that you're all well and that you're not affected, although many of us are feeling the effects of the lockdowns, the government policies, maybe school closures, maybe you've been asked to work from home, maybe you've seen some panic buying in your area. Panic buying is when people go to the shops in a panic and buy lots and lots of stuff, lots of food, lots of medical supplies, lots of masks. And so that's called panic buying. I'm going to write this in the comments for you. Panic buying. Have you experienced any panic buying? To be honest, I did go to the shops this morning and buy a few extra little things to go in the cupboards. I stocked up on paracetamol for my son and paracetamol for myself. And yes, I am starting to feel a little bit nervous about whether or not we have enough food in the house in case we have to lock down. So to lock down is basically the term we use when we shut everything and stop ourselves from moving around. So you might be on lockdown. A hospital might go on lockdown. A firm or a whole city might be locked down. It's a restriction of movement and trying to keep everyone in one place. Okay, so lots of you are jumping into the chat now, so I'm going to get started. So the first thing you would have heard is the word epidemic. Epidemic. I'm going to type this into the chat for you so you know how it's spelled. Epidemic. Epidemic. Now, an epidemic basically is when you have a widespread occurrence of an infectious disease, particularly within one's area, so within a country or within a town, and it all happens around the same time. So this is what we would consider an epidemic. Now, it becomes a pandemic, which is the next word I want to introduce you to, if it spreads outside of that area and becomes more worldwide. So if the disease becomes a big problem outside of one country and starts infecting lots of people around the world, then it becomes a pandemic. And so there's been lots of discussion by the World Health Organization about whether or not we are now dealing with a pandemic or whether it's still an epidemic that's had a little bit of few cases in different countries. But in China, obviously, it's an epidemic for certain. It's an epidemic. And I think now we're getting to a point where we can consider it a pandemic. So I always think about the difference between epidemic and pandemic. like, imagine you have a beautiful garden with lots of trees, and one tree gets an infection, like a little virus, and that tree is not very well. And you can see the infection spreading across the tree through all the branches and all the leaves. That's an epidemic. It's within one tree. But if you notice around the garden, suddenly all the trees start getting infected and you can't contain the infection, then it's a pandemic. Okay? Okay, so I have been writing these things in the chat for those of you who aren't sure how to spell it. I'm going to just do it again for you. So we have epidemic and pandemic. Okay, epidemic and pandemic. Okay, hope that helps. Maybe a few of you could write it down as well, so that people can see it repeated. It also helps you to remember how it's spelt if you write it yourself. It's a bit of practice. All right, so the next word you're going to hear is the word contagious. Contagious. Now, often with this particular virus, people have been saying highly contagious. It's a highly contagious virus. So contagious. Now, contagious means it's likely to spread. So it's likely to move from one person to another. I'm going to write it down for you now. Contagious. Contagious. Now, that first syllable, the con, becomes the weak syllable, and that o becomes a schwa, contagious. It's a very contagious virus. Okay. All right. So this is a highly contagious virus. It spreads very quickly from one person to another. All right. Now, the next word on my list is the word makeshift. Makeshift. China was amazing in their response to the outbreak in terms of how fast they were able to create these hospitals. I can't remember how many days, but they built a number of hospitals in just a few days. It was incredible in order to help house the people who were ill or who are ill. And so these hospitals are called makeshift hospitals. So if something is makeshift, it means it's a temporary measure or a temporary device. So it's something you've made to be used very quickly, but not as a permanent solution. So it's makeshift. You can use this with other nouns as well, but in this case, we're talking about makeshift hospitals and makeshift wards. So a ward is an area in a hospital where you would normally have the beds and people resting on a hospital ward. And because obviously a lot of people are sick, they've had to create makeshift wards in different places, perhaps where they would normally store things. They've created makeshift wards. And again, it means temporary. So not long-term, not permanent, it's temporary, makeshift. A makeshift hospital has been created. So we have epidemic, pandemic, contagious, and makeshift. Now, the next word that you'll come across is not talked about so often now, but it's the incubation period. The incubation period. Now, an incubation period is the process of keeping something, in this case the virus, at the right temperature and under the right conditions for it to grow. So obviously, if you catch the virus, it may not affect you straight away. It has a long incubation period. So I think it's something like 2 to 3 weeks before you'll start to feel the effects. I'm going to just share the word here with you now. So I've just pasted that into the comments. Incubation period. Now, I often hear the word incubator or incubation period when you're talking about chickens. When you're trying to hatch eggs. When a chicken has laid an egg, the eggs may be put into incubators, which help to keep them warm and under the right conditions to help them to hatch. So that's how I normally think about that particular word. But in this case, it's the conditions that are needed for the virus to, you know, take hold of a person. Okay, so it does have a long incubation period, which is why this is becoming such a difficult virus to control and contain. Now, obviously, this is what we call an infection. It's an infection. Hopefully, none of you have caught the infection, but I just wanted to look at the word infection because obviously it's one of those words that we can use in a few different ways. So the infection is the virus that has created illness within you. To infect is the verb. So I will infect you. If I have the infection and we get too close, I will infect you, not on purpose. And you will be infected. You're infected. So that will be the adjective. Okay, so it's one of those words that you can very easily change to have different meanings. Okay, so next and the most important thing that we're looking for is a vaccine. A vaccine. But apparently a vaccine is not going to be available until next year at the earliest, because these things take a lot of time. They have to first understand the virus, understand how it's made up, then test numerous different ways of attacking the virus, and then it has to go into trials and then human trials, and so it takes a long time to make something that is safe to be used as a widespread vaccine to help everyone. So vaccine, vaccine, vaccine. All right, I will talk about what countries have been affected and what's happening here in the UK as well in a moment. I'm just going to go through all these words first, so just stick with me. Okay, so the next is the word cases. We use this word when talking about a number of illness that's affected a number of people. We'll talk about the number of cases. So a case, the word case can be used in lots of different ways, but when we talk about illness, it's an instant or a situation. So how many times has this illness occurred in people? How many cases has there been? Okay, so how many cases of the coronavirus have there been in your country, I would say, rather than, I could say how many people have been affected, but I could easily just say how many cases has there been. Okay, so next we have the word diagnosis. Diagnosis. I'm just going to write this down for you. So a diagnosis is the identification of an illness or a disease made because of the patient's symptoms. So you will go to the doctor and say, these are my symptoms, and the doctor will look at it all and go, okay, this is my diagnosis. So it's him identifying what is wrong. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to, okay, please stop spamming in the comments. I have hidden your comments. Those people spamming, it doesn't help anybody. So don't spam. Okay, so the next word is the word pneumonia. This is a very difficult one to spell. I always struggle with the spelling of it, and therefore you might struggle to pronounce it. I'm just going to write it down for you now. Pneumonia. It has a silent P. A lot of words to do with the lungs and breathing come from the Latin word. I don't know what the Latin word is, but it's Latin. It's like I don't know. But pneumonia and lots of words around the lungs, medical words, will have this P-N-E-U beginning to the word. Okay. It's Latin. Pneumonia is loan. I'm not quite sure exactly what that sentence means, Danilo, but yes, it is from Latin. But anyway, pneumonia. So ignore the P and just start with the N. And pneumonia is the problem with coronavirus. It causes pneumonia. Pneumonia is an infection of one or both of your lungs. So people who are of ill health, who suffer already with maybe respiratory problems. A respiratory problem is a breathing problem. If you have underlying health issues, maybe heart issues or issues with asthma perhaps, or any lung problems, then getting pneumonia, an infection in the lung, is very, very dangerous, and this is where the coronavirus is problematic. So pneumonia, I'm going to write it again for you if you missed it. Pneumonia. Okay, so the next word is the word flu. Very simple. It's the basic word for the coronavirus. It's like a flu, isn't it? So it's a contagious, there's that word again. It's a contagious respiratory illness. So respiratory is anything to do with breathing. A contagious respiratory illness caused by influenza, and this is where flu is short for influenza, caused by influenza viruses that infect the nose, the throat, and sometimes the lungs. So I'm going to share that definition with you. Here we go. So flu is a contagious respiratory illness caused by the influenza viruses that infect the nose, throat, and sometimes the lungs. Okay? So what happens when you have coronavirus or the flu? Well, you might have a cough. That's a cough. A cough. This has an unusual spelling. I'm going to write it down for you. Don't be confused. Cough is how you pronounce that. And that's just what I did. I coughed. I coughed. You might also have sneeze. So you might be sneezing. So a cough or a sneeze. One of the main ways to know if you are ill is if you have a fever. A fever. A fever is a high temperature. If you have a high temperature, then you have a fever. So a high temperature, a fever, is anything over 37 degrees Fahrenheit. Sorry, 37 degrees centigrade. Or if you work in Fahrenheit, it's anything over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, I believe. So if you are anything above those numbers, then you have a fever. If it's only a little bit above, then you might have a mild fever. But say you're a couple of degrees over, then you have a high fever. All right. So a cough, a sneeze, and a fever are the ways to identify whether you're possibly suffering from the coronavirus. So the word identify basically means to establish or to indicate something or someone. You might identify a person, say it's that person. She's the one who stole my handbag. Or you can identify an illness by saying, you have all the right symptoms. Yes, this is the illness that you have. So to identify is to indicate who or what something is. All right. Yes, the word symptoms, which Carman, is that how I pronounce your name? Is another word that you'll hear a lot of. Symptoms. And this is just the different parts of the illness. So a cough is a symptom, a fever is a symptom, double vision, dizziness, anything like that would be a symptom of some underlying illness. Okay? Right, so I'm nearly at the end of my list of words. So many government officials have been talking about their strategy to deal with the coronavirus outbreak. So strategy. A strategy is a plan, their plan of action. Now, our government met today and they are deciding their plan of action for the UK. We're yet to hear exactly what that is, but they are coming up with a plan of action because the UK is starting to see more and more cases now. So they are coming up with a strategy to deal with the virus. Now, one strategy will purely focus on containment. The word containment. Containment means to keep something that's harmful under control and within limits. So to contain something is to keep it within limits and to stop it from getting out and hurting other people. So they're talking about trying to contain the coronavirus, although I don't think they're doing a very good job at the moment. Another word you could use is the word confine. So someone who is ill will have to be confined, probably in isolation. So there's two words. Confined means to restrict someone within a certain space. So I might be confined to my room, or I might be confined to my house, or I might be confined to my town. So it's keeping people within a certain space that's limited. And isolate. Yes, lots of people have been asked to self-isolate, but to isolate, again, is to stop yourself from being near anyone or coming into contact with anyone. Okay. All right, so that's the end of the list that I made for you. So the words I covered were epidemic, pandemic, contagious, makeshift, incubation period, infection, infected and infect, vaccine, cases, diagnosis, pneumonia, flu, cough, sneeze, a fever, identify, strategy, containment, confine, and isolate. We also added the word symptoms into that list as well. Okay, so hopefully that gives you at least a couple of words that you are previously unfamiliar with. I'm going to now look at, okay, so currently, at the moment, around the world, we are looking at 89,779 cases of the coronavirus. Hello, Gareth. Is it possible to catch this disease over the internet? No, Gareth is a friend of mine. He's trying to be funny. No, of course you can't catch it over the internet. Just make sure you've washed your hands just to be extra safe. Okay, so we've also seen up to now 3,069 deaths, unfortunately, from this particular virus. Now, one thing to bear in mind is how I say these numbers. We always have an and in there if they're big numbers. So we have 3,069 deaths. We have 89,779 cases. So if you need to refresh your numbers, then I do have some videos on this channel that can help you to speak numbers out loud, because big numbers can be tricky. Now, the good thing is 45,501 of those cases have seen a recovery. So people are recovering from this virus. But obviously everyone's being affected. Obviously the biggest place that has the largest number of cases is China, followed by South Korea. Now Italy is next, and Iran. So I do keep my fingers crossed for anyone in those countries. I hope that you're able to stay safe and that you're able to maintain some form of normality. I know that in some places where there's a serious lockdown, people are not able to leave their houses. And in cases like the Diamond Princess cruise liner, people were locked onto that cruise liner for a very long period of time. And I don't think they were having a very good holiday. Now, in the UK, we officially have 36 cases confirmed at the moment, but that's been changing rapidly over the last few days. So I imagine that we are about to see a bit of an explosion of cases here. It's difficult at this time of year to know if you are infected, because at this time of year, many people suffer with coughs and colds. We're sneezing. I myself have been coughing and sneezing and had a high temperature at different points over the last month. And so it's very difficult to know whether or not it's actually coronavirus. Now, Mohammed's just said about what's the situation of COVID-19 in the UK. COVID-19 is another way of saying coronavirus. So yes, we're seeing different cases popping up. Popping up means unexpectedly coming into view, popping up all over the UK. And also, yeah, so we've had like cases in Northern Ireland, there's been one case in Scotland, I think maybe 1 or 2 cases in Wales, and a number of cases in the UK. Most of them came from people who travelled abroad and come back with the virus. But now we're starting to see cases of what they call community spread, where people are getting the virus and they haven't travelled abroad and they haven't necessarily knowingly been in contact with anyone who's been to an affected area. So that makes it very, very difficult to contain. If you don't know where the virus came from, who has it, who is spreading it, you can't contain it. So yes, I think the closest case to me is about 30 miles away. Unfortunately, I do live in a very busy part of the UK. I live close to London, and my partner travels into London every day. So if it comes to London, then there's a high probability, I mean, it already is in London. If it really breaks out in London, there's a high chance that either we'll get it or we will go into some form of lockdown. Perhaps my partner will be told he has to work from home, and my child will be sent home from nursery and the nursery will close down, perhaps. But who knows? Who knows? So the advice from the World Health Organization and different health organizations in most countries is good hand hygiene. Hygiene, that's a good word. Good hand hygiene basically just means if you're coughing and sneezing, try to catch it in your hand or in your elbow, and to wash your hands regularly. I mean, ideally you cough and sneeze into a tissue, not into your hand. That's really gross. But you can't always have a tissue to hand. That means readily available. So ideally, yes, cough and sneeze into a tissue, put it in the bin, and then wash your hands thoroughly. Another great word, thoroughly. Or yes, Michael has said, wash your hands properly. So thoroughly just means well throughout. So not just a couple of seconds, but ideally like at least a 30-second wash. Yeah, Michael said 20 seconds. I'd say 30 seconds. Let's not take any chances. Lots of soap and also alcohol gel, like hand sanitizer. Okay, so I do hope that this has been helpful. I know it's quite a morbid subject. It's not a very positive thing to be talking about, but it's very current, and I thought it might be helpful to some of you who like to use English news as a way to improve your language skills. And I do believe it's a great way to improve your language skills because it's very current, it's very authentic. It's language that we're using regularly because it's talking about topics that we're all familiar with. All right. So please do continue to leave your comments. I do have to leave now because I have to go and get my son from nursery. And it's been a pleasure. I'm sorry I wasn't able to share notes with you, but like I said, I've had problems with my software. Oh, it's never ending, the technical issues that I have trying to go live. But thank you for joining me, and I do hope that you all stay well. Look after yourselves, wash your hands, and I'll speak to you soon.